A2IM, the collective voice of independent music.
Right. Hello and welcome all to Indie Week Virtual 2020. My name is Evan Plake. I'm the membership manager here at A2IM, and we will be discussing the topic of drowning in data and how to cope with that volume. We've got a great cast of panelists here today. Just going sort of clockwise, we've got Lindsay Schapiro, VP of Digital over at Mom and Pop, home to artists like Flume, Courtney Barnett, Tycho, many more. We've got Matt Brinkworth, head of Digital over at Omnian Music Group, home to Cinderlin, Capture Tracks, 2MR, many other great labels. We've got Mariah Czap, Digital Marketing Manager over at Rock Music Group, founder and CEO of PEX, multimedia rights management and analytics platform. And I guess just to start sort of very broadly before focusing in a little bit more, just to discuss a little bit about kind of best practices, again, generally speaking, for kind of cutting through the noise with, again, with so many data sources that labels, publishers, rights holders have in terms of email campaigns, smart linking campaigns, socials numbers, et cetera. Kind of what techniques and tools do you use on the label side to kind of help simplify that and actually turn that into actionable strategy? And maybe I'll cue that up for you, Mariah, since you gave kind of a detailed answer on that.
Yeah, so for me, I think that data should help us make informed decisions. I totally think it's easy to get lost in the sea of numbers when you don't have certain defined areas of focus or goals that you're working towards. And so something that we do at Rock is we'll do a big social media audit or just data dump, honestly, before we start every campaign. So it allows us to look at data across a variety of sources. So streaming data, social data, we look at video streams, we look at past sales history, and then using that audit, we then define what our goals for the project are and sort of where the areas of focus will be. And I've really found that having that framework sort of helps determine which metrics will be crucial for my team to track across each project. We've sort of said, okay, one of our goals is to build an engaged audience to market and then remarket to. I might put more of an emphasis on social, email, and advertising data because we've sort of outlined that as one of our goals. But I think in terms of how I monitor data and sort of how I'm getting updated on what's going on our projects, I rely really heavily on the weekly email reports that I get from the platforms that I use to pull data. So Apple for Artists, Spotify for Artists. It's important for me because our team is small to be able to react to data fairly quickly and in real time. And so getting an automated report gives me a little bit more of just like a snapshot. And I found that it gives me enough information to contextualize the data fairly quickly. And then from there, I'm able to like drill down into more specific or detailed reporting depending on what the data shows and what we're tracking.
Great. Yeah. Any other label folks, Lindsay or Matt, kind of on that, simplifying things and actually, turning those numbers into something actionable from the mom and pop side or from the Omnian side?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really good point to be able, like bringing up working on a small team. I would say Mom and Pop is a growing team from when I started 4 years ago. We're now twice the size, which is amazing to just see that growth. But at the same time, we still like everyone to contribute in multiple ways, which means that, we don't have a person who's only doing data all day, every day. So everyone needs to be equipped to understand these platforms and tools. Obviously, me working in digital, everyone can come to me with a data question, but I actually make a really strong point and purpose out of getting everyone on our team to be data efficient on their own and know how to use these platforms like Apple for Artists, Spotify for Artists, our internal data tool as well. All of these platforms. And then really the simplification comes down to, okay, which of these analytics tools do we need to be checking daily or even multiple times per day versus which things can be run weekly, which things can be looked at quarterly. And that really comes down to the prioritization of the platform that we're, looking at. For example, something like our streaming data, we'll be looking at that for the biggest streaming platforms multiple times per day. But, maybe the smaller DSPs or, smaller social platforms, we'll check in on those every few weeks just to see what the overall trend is, not necessarily on a day-to-day. So yes, the prioritization of all of these different sources of data, so that you can really be efficient with your time.
Absolutely. Great. And yeah, maybe I'll transition to Rasty and kind of the big data side. So just maybe talk a little bit about kind of how PEX helps users, on a big data perspective across, the billions of data points that you track, kind of how the solution helps users kind of cut through the noise in terms of, what kind of insights do you provide, and then kind of what kind of informed decisions can rights holding users take from those insights.
Sure. So our system works very similarly to Google. We crawl the internet, we extract audio-visual content, we update it constantly. And so we see 20 billion videos and songs across 40 plus platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Douyin, a lot of Chinese, Russian, and other platforms, Giphy and such. And so we connect these data or connect these videos and songs to each other, so we know what's a derivative, what's a copy of what contains what kind of content across the internet. And so we see a lot of different trends. We are able to distinguish between platforms and what content clicks on them. B, we are able to track kind of a spread, what is essentially called virality of a content from one place to many others. And then we are able to compare a performance of content between different platforms. So for instance, if you rely solemnly on Spotify or streaming data, they can tend to be played well because the artists know what you're looking at, so they will buy additional streams or such. Virality is incredibly hard to fake because you will have to open tens of thousands of accounts, somehow build an audience for every single one of them on disparate platforms, and somehow spread this content yourself, which is almost impossible. And so we tend to see the real world rather than what someone is trying to get you to see. And so it's used a lot of times to make sure that the data that you're seeing in other platforms is actually real. And then we help to understand trends. So for instance, when, what kind of content is clicking on YouTube, what kind of content is clicking on Instagram or TikTok, and then how that content spreads between platforms. And so a lot of rights holders will come to us not only just to deal with DRM, digital rights management, but also to understand where the content works, what they shall do with it, and how they shall work with it.
Great. Yep, that's awesome. And I think particularly important, as I know you mentioned a lot how much kind of revenue is locked in UGC from kind of a monetization, from a licensing perspective. So yep, that's awesome. It's very important. Yeah, so transitioning back to the label side a little bit, just to kind of open up the veil a little bit on playlists. And so what are the key data points to kind of take stock of when you're analyzing playlist placement, both on kind of big picture editorial side, a New Music Friday, or a big Apple playlist, something like that, as well as user driven, algorithmic, third party, etc. Just kind of what do you look to ensure that those placements particularly lead to kind of long-term engagement and followership from fans rather than just sort of empty streams, something like that. So yeah, Matt, if you want to speak on that a little bit.
Sure. We look at all of the kind of really obvious metrics, how many followers. If we've had previous playlisting there before, we can usually see how many listeners, how many streams we might get from that playlist. And a big one is how often it's updated. Somebody once described New Music Friday as like finding $100 on the floor. And I think there's something in that it's kind of like you get all of your joy in one go. So we like to get in those playlists that are updated like once a month, chill road trip or something like that, something that's a bit more based on vibe and stuff rather than like new music. Because yeah, if you end up in a new music playlist, you can be out of that pretty quickly. And in terms of kind of trying to knock on some kind of algorithmic benefit to getting playlisting, we do all of the kind of standard best practices with our artists, posting it, asking people to play their track from it, save from it, little things like that. They can kind of like give data points to Spotify or Apple to encourage them to continue playlists.
Great. Yeah. I know that's particularly from our label members that we talk to so frequently. That's kind of the big thing is actually just cutting through the multitude of playlists and the sort of the data streams there. So yeah, that's great. Another kind of key I think metric a lot of the new labels particularly are looking at is kind of cutting through airplay data and then just sort of geographic data more broadly. I mean, so for big indies that have digital outreach teams and particularly like radio promotion teams, obviously airplay is it can be pretty straightforward to sort of incorporate particular stations into release strategies that way. But just sort of beyond that, beyond just sending mailers, promo, whatever to particular stations, kind of how do you use that geographic data and that airplay data if your artist is streaming particularly well abroad, or if the artist is being paid quite a bit in a certain state, something like that. So what do you do with that from kind of the label perspective?
For us, we use airplay data a lot to help influence where we should be spending underwriting and advertising dollars. I would say we get radio reports, we analyze them, we compare those markets to the data that we're pulling on a daily or weekly basis, and really use that to help influence where in the US or where in the world we're spending advertising dollars. From the geographic data standpoint, we've seen a lot of artists recently use that data from specifically streaming platforms to influence tour routings. So artists have noticed, hey, this is one of my top streaming markets. I've never played here before. I should make this a priority. So if I see that there's a big uptick in the UK for an artist specifically on Spotify, I might run an ad set calling out the new single, tagging Spotify specifically in the UK because I'm seeing that it's over-indexing there.
Absolutely. That's what I was going to say pretty much to the T. And, I think data from streaming platforms and social platforms and airplay really, you would expect them to align exactly just because of, as we all know, how powerful both streaming and radio airplay is. But it's really interesting to see that sometimes the reaction isn't instant. It needs to be on the radio for a really long time in order to really start to move the needle, or vice versa, it needs to be streaming pretty well in a specific territory for a decent amount of time before you start to see radio programmers start to pick it up there. So it's really just about keeping track of which markets are popping and how you can use that market that information to leverage for better support in those specific territories, and make sure you're making the most out of that data that's trending.
Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but recently I found that the Shazam data sort of correlates airplay data, like they're almost used in tandem. And so a lot of times when I get my Apple reports every Friday, I'll see a spike in the Shazams, and then we'll get the radio report and there'll be a direct correlation with it.
I think Shazam is that instant connection. You hear it, you go, I wonder what that is, Shazam, versus like hearing it and maybe you're in your car or you're out and about. The streaming connection isn't as instant unless you have the time to instantly stream after you listen to it on the air. So what instead we'll see is that trend will happen over time. The more airplay you get over time, you'll see that the streaming in those markets pop off, but it's not this next day you're going to see it. That we see that more with things like track sales or Shazams that are more like transactional instantly. But yeah, I mean, it's the connection between airplay and all of these things is so important to everything that we do. And we're fortunate. I mean, Mom and Pop is really fortunate that we have a really strong radio team, really for a very powerful radio team especially for an indie. So, we've had a lot of success with both radio and streaming in that sense, working together.
Yeah, and for CT perspective, we all of that 100%, and also like to kind of flip the chart upside down and see where we're really lacking. And so, if we're not seeing what we would normally like to see on Deezer and in France, then we kind of adjust budget to represent that. So maybe we need a bit more help in that region. Great.
And then Rasty, on sort of the big data perspective, is if you could talk a little bit about the kinds of geographic insights maybe that your solution provides a little bit, and then again, kind of the actionable things that that users can maybe take from that geographic data in terms of usage that PEX tracks.
Well, one of the interesting things that we noticed early on, and it's getting more propagated, is that different platforms attract different mood of people, or maybe different audience, but it's the same person. So the same person uses TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, but they use it for different purpose. And so where one content works very well on one platform, it doesn't work as well on the other. And when it comes to music, what is super interesting is like music is used in different contexts on all different platforms. And so what happens to us a lot, where customers come and say, I have this song and I want to understand how it moves and where it goes. What they find out very quickly is it spreads out some semi-evenly across the platforms if it's viral enough, but it will be used in different contexts. So for instance, the mannequin challenge that happened in the past, or any of these viral phenomena, were always based on the fact that it's spread in the platform that has this kind of social connection, rather than on platforms that are very focused on performance or something. So for instance, Instagram didn't have as much of them as Facebook. And so what we see a lot is if you have a certain idea for your promotion, so you have a song and you want to use it in certain context, then based on the context is the platform being picked. And we can measure the impact of that. And we usually, something similar already popped up, so someone else done it before, maybe by accident. And so we can measure the impact in the past to see it, how could this play out in the future. And so we use this a lot in movie trailers, where we compare different trailers against each other that are essentially from the same kind of benchmark or from the same category. In the music, it's similar when you have 2 or 3 artists that kind of produce similar kind of content, and then you want to understand where their content clicked before you start pushing yours. And so that's usually very interesting. And then geographical trends are very limited usually to platforms. So certain platforms are very strong in certain regions. So you have WeContact and OK, which is Russia only, or Russian-speaking audiences, while we have Youku Tudou and similar in China. And then you have Douyin, which is the opposite of, or Chinese version of TikTok. And so based on what you are trying to see and what you're trying to achieve, you pick the platform with the audience that you're looking for. Because even if it's the same person, they don't want to consume certain content on different platforms. So people don't go to YouTube to watch their friends doing certain stuff. They are expecting that from more Facebook. And so you should also not, try to force your content that is not essentially aligning with the platform. And so that's what we do quite a lot with the customers.
Great. Yeah, I guess it wouldn't be a 2020 panel without a COVID question, of course. So I guess wondering, particularly since we've seen so many just broad big picture changes in catalog streaming being up, certain genres being up, new release charts being down a little bit, as much as 10, 15 points. I've seen those kinds of numbers. So just a big picture with all these numbers. How are you kind of crafting, or I should say adjusting maybe release and marketing strategy kind of based on these this new sort of streaming music consumption reality?
I think the impact of COVID across our entire industry is just so devastating. In terms of my heart goes out to all of the artists and managers and crew and touring people and venues and promoters. It's crazy. But one thing that we are seeing is artists are stuck at home, and when they're stuck at home, they're creating not necessarily exclusively official tracks that are proper new releases or singles or things like that, but they're creating content that can just live on social or on YouTube or on TikTok. They have a lot of time on their hands, more than they've ever had before, and they're eager to connect with their fans. One thing, obviously, it's definitely, I've noticed the trends on streaming platforms being slightly down on new releases, slightly up on catalog. In general, I'm definitely curious to see how this is going to change super long term in terms of premium subscriptions. So far, it seems like for the most part, As the economic crisis has kind of hit everywhere, people have held on to their premium subscriptions so far, a decent amount. But, as this thing carries on a really long time, that may change and become more difficult. So, for now, we just have to keep finding creative ways to market music virtually and connect with fans, whether it's through special intimate Zoom parties or like this one, or some sort of more formalized live performance. We've already done, I think I just tallied it, but a lot of our artists have been doing these benefit concerts and live streams and things, and across the board, I think mom and pop artists have already raised over $250,000 for COVID relief in one form or another. So that's, a really big impact, and, just staying busy. And, we actually certain artists are eager to continue putting out new releases, despite certain trends feeling down or up. They don't care. They're like, this is my art. I want to put this song out. I've had it for months and I'm ready to release it into the world. And we're here to help amplify it the best that we can, despite everything going on.
What this situation has shown us is streaming's reliance on passive listening. And the kind of big hit was going to the gym, commuting, cafes and restaurants that just put a list on loop all day. And, that kind of scary minus 10% on streams, we were kind of fortunate that we were in the middle of an album campaign as it hit, and there was a lot of kind of anxiety about releasing music, and a lot of people who were just about to start a campaign, managers and artists, were kind of very apprehensive about doing so. But we kind of were gifted this data from this campaign that was already rolling to see that new music was actually doing reasonably similar to how it normally would, from a digital standpoint at least. And so we kind of came with the strategy that maintaining a digital release schedule as we normally would, perhaps with a slightly longer campaign, so that we can have different touring points when eventually that comes back around, and physical the same. But from a digital perspective, kind of maintaining seemed to be the best way to kind of battle that decrease, because I think the reason that Netflix saw such a spike was because it's an engaged way of consuming media. The reason we saw such a downturn was because we're reliant on very passive playlisting and stuff. But I think that listening to an album is a pretty engaged thing. So, people are spending a lot of time on their social media. They're seeing when things are released, and they're clicking through and they're playing it. And so that hasn't really, for us, taken much of a hit. It's more the kind of passive listening, that we would normally be kind of just churning streams over periods of time. And then when it came to sort of catalog and people turning to the classics, the Mac DeMarcos of the world to kind of cheer them up, it was all kind of about bolstering that a little bit and helping them along the way. And if they're, trying to remember, we're very lucky that we had a 10th anniversary of Wild Nothing Gemini happen in the midst of all of this. And that's very much like a comfort listening album for a lot of people. So we're just kind of going through the catalog and supporting it a little harder than normally we would. We're pretty active on pushing catalog anyway, but we kind of upped it a bit, particularly on social media, just to kind of help people remember, okay, look, if you're looking for the older releases, we got loads of them too. And that's basically how we've kind of maintained through it.
Yeah, I think for us, honestly, we might be releasing more music digitally now than we ever have. I think with artists not being able to tour, we've really had to think of additional assets, anything creative that we can be rolling out to market in order to prolong the length of an album campaign, whether it's, okay, we're getting ready to announce a record, or we're moving into phase 2 or phase 3 of a campaign. We've put a lot of emphasis on Bandcamp recently. after the first Bandcamp Friday, we've been using direct sales data to sort of influence our marketing and release strategies there. We saw a huge, and I never thought I would say this in 2020, but we saw a huge uptick in downloads. Like, people are still willing to buy downloads. And so, and that was even after they've waived their revenue share. So we've started offering exclusive content on Bandcamp every week. It feels like the biggest piece of feedback we've been getting from fans and our audience is that they want to support the artists that they love directly, and the artists want to give them something. And so we've just been doing this. Okay, every Friday we release something new, and it's exclusive to Bandcamp. And I think eventually we'll start having to look at, okay, how does this play out across all other partners, and how does this relate to a bigger strategy? But yeah, for us specifically, Bandcamp has been a huge priority for us, just knowing that we can help make artists money there.
No, same here, really. I mean, it's crazy how the downloads are up there. It's wild. I think that to purchase merch requires a lot of capital. Like, you need to have the $40 to buy the sweatshirt. But the way people are treating digital downloads is they're treating it almost like a donation. They're like, here's $4.99. It's all I have. I can't give you more, but take my $4.99. And it's really powerful. And it's really great to see that fans wanting to contribute, because a lot of artists are small businesses that rely on touring. And in other countries, and we support artists better than we do here in the States, at least. So it's like a lot of artists are actually like unemployed, but they can't qualify for things like traditional unemployment because it wasn't like a job in the same sense. So yeah, we do see things like Bandcamp or these live streams that are slightly ticketed. People are willing to spend the $5 to $10. But it is an economic difficult time. So the $40 purchases are definitely going down, merch sales a little bit, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And we are a little bit over, but I'll try to sneak one more in there. Hopefully it's not too much of a loaded question. I guess just speaking, again, just industry-wide, if we think that data is kind of becoming more accessible, because, on the one hand, there's so much talk about it in, trade press. There's so many of, your chart metrics, the kind of accessible data platforms to help, ingest all this. But there's also just, so many more streams of data, so much more volume of data. So just, again, generally, do we think the industry is becoming kind of more adept at sorting through these things, or maybe less so? And maybe I'll start with you, Rasty, since you sort of are trying to address this problem head on.
Well, more data is always challenging, and unfortunately at this point every business is a data business, and so a lot of folks will have to go through form of re-education and trying to understand what it means. More data means that you have to sift through more to identify the trends that you're looking for, and so it's always starts with a question, and you need to know how to get the answer. And so what we do see is people start struggling with the amounts of data that they are getting, and start getting overwhelmed because different sources can answer different questions. But if you are asking different sources the same question, they might give you very opposite answers, and then it's very hard to act on them. And so the credo in our company is actionable data. Like, we don't sell raw data. We never provide users with what we see. We only give them data that they can action on, that we already put in a form where they can actually just make one single action, rather than here's what we see and you figure out what that means. And that is a very tough thing, because you need to know what the question being asked is, and you need to understand it in the core, which means if you are a data scientist, now you have to become a business person. And if you're a business person, now have to become a data scientist. And so I am very interested to see how kind of the small businesses artists are going to become data scientists, because it's a quite loaded task, loaded job. And so we try to do our best, but with more data, there's just more problems coming in. And so this is going to be quite interesting to watch.
Right. And then maybe on the label side, and if you feel that maybe you or any of your other label colleagues have kind of a better or maybe less more tenuous grasp on the data than maybe they did 5 years ago, and there were kind of less less volume of it.
For the first time, we're able to know which songs are really loved within albums. The only metric we really had was how many total units were sold. So that insight is super valuable. I do think that the more data we have, it's kind of like 50% liberating and then 50% kind of stressful. Maybe not for people like us, but I do worry for our artists sometimes that can spend all day, every day staring at that Spotify streaming number going up live. Our brains haven't evolved since the Stone Age, and we're trying to deal with things at a rate now that probably not equipped to do. So I do worry about that kind of staring at these numbers could have an effect on the creatives of our industry. I think people like everybody on this panel were kind of trained in it, and it's what we're supposed to do. But I do think that it could have quite a detriment to people's sense of success and self-worth if they're constantly staring at these numbers, followers, streams, likes, etc.
Yeah, I think artists are that's totally true. Artists are more data literate than they've ever been.
Mm-hmm.
But also, you want to, and that's awesome. They should be educated about their own career and success and performance. You don't want them to be like worried about writing a song that's going to be good for playlists. It's you want to write artists making art that is just great. And sure, we can make a radio edit later down the line that's good for playlists. But I think in general, what I've noticed, and maybe everyone else might have a different attitude, is that every individual who wasn't data literate before has become slightly more data literate in the last 5 years. But also the volume, the like total ability to be like an expert at data is just so far ahead of where we used to be. So it's like now everyone's gotten better, but the finish line has like drifted off way over here. So relative improvement is not as big because we have such a so much opportunity to analyze data.
Well, and especially with different reporting constantly being developed, I feel like as soon as you think that you've got it all down, something else gets introduced, and it's like you're starting from square one.
Totally.
I will say that I do feel like the data that we have access to now feels a little bit more than maybe before. I feel like it transcends just charting numbers or hard sales figures and radio plays and radio charting. And it is something that we're able to react to and use it to influence marketing and decision making. But it is easy to get sort of lost in the data mine. I mean, it happens to me all the time. I've had to delete stuff off my phone because I'll watch TV and just like look at Apple for Artists or Spotify for Artists. And I do worry that on the one hand, I think it is a positive that artists do have direct access to this, but I worry sort of what you said, Lindsay, that they're going to use that to influence the art in a way that maybe shouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Yeah, all great points. And that's probably a good time to cap it. This, of course, has been drowning in data and all these ways that we just discussed to kind of cope with that volume. So thank you all for giving such great insight. That was really fantastic. And thank you to the viewers for attending Virtual Indie Week.